Welcome to episode 62 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor Muir, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful, dynamic, transformative, epic, so students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. All right, well, welcome back to the Epic Classroom Podcast. It has been a really fun week with engaging with what we talked about in the last podcast, which was all about students not actually losing their attention span. Students, at least according to some research I've read and a lot of teachers I've talked to, they haven't lost their ability to hold on to focus. They've lost the reason to care about focusing when it comes to school, or at least by and large. So I wrote about that, and I had a podcast about it, and a video, and I put it all out to the internet, and boy, has there been some debate on the subject, which, by the way, I am here for. I love a good conversation. And I got to tell you, I'm feeling encouraged because that's mostly what it's been. I mean, this is one of the most popular articles that I've put out in a long time. I put it out on Facebook and Instagram and my website, linking back to my website, and hundreds of thousands of people have engaged with the content, which is very exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking because, you know, you go and put this time into writing and researching and talking to people and creating something, and then it stops being your own, and it's kind of just a conversation piece. And a lot of people have been having conversations around what I wrote and talked about. If you go over on my Facebook page, The Epic Classroom, I posted it, and I think it's near like 200 people have commented on the article. And I'd say a good 50% of them agree with me. They're like, yes, I've seen students focus. I've seen them still, I've been able to hold their attention when they care about what they're learning. So yeah, I agree with you. And then another 50% don't agree. They're like, no, it is so clear that students, their brains have been rewired by technology and social conditions, and they're different than they used to be, and they don't have the same attention span they used to have. And I got to tell you that the debate has been a little fiery at times, and mostly I sit back and watch. I've engaged also in it, but like just listening to people have this discussion, and then even talking to some educator friends of mine about it and hearing what they think, and hearing some of them even disagree with me, and then some agree. It's like, oh man, this is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to talk about this stuff. We're supposed to discuss it. This is what the internet used to do really well, at least in education circles. I mean, when I first got on that old website called Twitter, it would be big debates and conversations and discussions about topics like this, and people would have it out, and they'd share research, and it would actually even shift the way you thought about a subject, and it was good, and it made you better at putting that subject into practice. And that's what it's been for me this week. I've learned from other people. I've even flexed my ideas a bit. I still stand by the thesis of what I wrote about, that students still have this capacity to learn deeply. We just have to give them a good reason to want to put in the effort of learning and focusing deeply. So I still believe that, but I'm also more open to the fact that, yeah, there might have been some rewiring that's occurred in kids. To me, I'm like, man, this is nuanced, and that's what any good discussion is. And I think this applies beyond just conversations about pedagogy in the state of education. I think we could have more discussions like this all over the place, and even on the internet, believe it or not, because I saw it happen. Now, I've been telling my friends, like, hey, you guys should go over to my page and see how people are actually having dialogue with each other, how good it is. And my friends have reminded me, yeah, but most of the people who follow you on Facebook are teachers, and teachers are good people. And teachers know how to have discussions, and teachers generally are more open-minded. And that is actually true. I mean, I'm trying to find some hope in the internet right now, because right now it's a pretty dreary place. And I'm like, well, see, there's still this beautiful little corner of it. But that's often how I feel about teachers in general. I go all over the place to cities all over the country and even world, and I talk to teachers. And every time I come home, I tell my wife, like, oh, that is the greatest group of people I've ever been with, right? Like, those are some good, kind, smart, thoughtful people. Like, maybe the world isn't actually burning down, because I seem to find really amazing groups of people wherever I go, whether I'm in the South or in the Midwest or out West or in the North. It's like there's good people everywhere. And my wife is always quick to remind me. She's like, yeah, but it is teachers you're going to spend your time with. So you could have some skewed information. So whatever it is, I sure like you fine folk. And if you were part of those conversations last week, or if you had your own after listening to the podcast, or reading the article, or watching the video, which I created a discussion guide to go with it. If you want that, you can actually go to last week's episode, and I've got it linked in there. But if you've been engaging in any of that with me, or, which, by the way, I've gotten so many lovely emails from people pushing back or affirming, whatever. If you've been doing that, awesome. I love it. Let's keep having good conversations. So this week, I want to start another conversation. Let me frame it this way. I want to talk about note-taking, which is like a really riveting subject, right? Like last week was talking about the capacity of the young mind to hold information for an extended amount of time. And this week, I want to talk about taking notes. But I'll tell you why that is actually riveting to me. If you asked me back in high school or when I was in college why I took notes, I probably would have responded to you. I would have said, well, so I'd have something to study later on. Right? For me, notes were just about capturing the information that was presented to me in a lecture or a video in class, primarily so that I could study it and prepare for a test. And if I missed something, it wasn't really that big a deal. I could just borrow somebody else's notes and study. Or honestly, sometimes I didn't pay the best attention in high school and college because I had this friend named Jacob who was a really diligent student, and I always knew I could just get Jacob's notes. And I could study, and I could pass the quiz or the test. Like, that's what the point of notes were to me. But today, things are different, right? Like with AI, note-taking is even easier than it used to be. You know, a student can take out their phone, and they can record a lecture. So let's say their teacher was doing direct instruction. They can pull out their phone, go to the Notes app, it's even called Notes, and record it. And then they can put it into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, and they can get it just transcribed. And then they can generate a detailed outline and a summary and have it incredibly detailed and everything they need. And they can even have AI fill in the gaps of maybe what even the lecturer didn't say. And they can do all of this in less than a minute, which makes you wonder, if note-taking is only about test prep, then why even go to class, right? Why not just like hide a phone on the bookshelf and let it do all the work? And then you just sneak in after class and get it and have ChatGPT do all the work. But here's the thing, and I have learned this from, my graduate studies, but then also spending time doing lots of direct instruction and lecturing and mixed with lots of other things. But like, that's a part of what you do as an educator, and having students take notes. But then also when you read the research, which we can talk about, once you start really diving into it, note-taking just for the purpose of preparing for a test, just so that you have a record of what happened in class or what you learned in class, it kind of misses out on note-taking's greatest value. Creating a study guide isn't the only reason to take notes, and it's honestly not even the most important one. Note-taking is about engaging the brain in a way that listening simply just can't do. When students take notes, they stop being passive listeners. They're interacting with the information. They're doing something with it. And when that happens, the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's control center, it kicks in. It starts firing in a way that just listening doesn't get that part of your brain working. It starts filtering what's important from what isn't. It's having to make decisions. It's critical thinking happening. And then at the same time, the hippocampus, which is our memory system, that's where long-term memory happens in our brain. When you take notes, the hippocampus and the memory system, it translates what's being heard into meaningful chunks. It stores the information in a place that it doesn't just get discarded right away. When students paraphrase or summarize or they sketch what they're hearing, when they take notes, their brain stores that information more effectively. And this is why handwritten notes so often beat verbatim typing, trying to type everything you hear, right? Handwriting requires more mental processing. And so note-taking isn't just about recording what you learned. And that's part of it, by the way. Of course, it's good to have something to study back on, but it's not just about recording what you learn. It's actually part of the learning itself. I learned this, I'm always a little late to the game, but I learned this great quote this summer from a teacher that's backed up by brain science, that writing is learning. It's one of the reasons I don't think AI should come and replace so much of the good work that we do in school, because if we just have AI write everything for us, even though it can do a lot of the writing tasks we would normally do ourselves, even though it's getting better and better at writing, we can't let it do that, especially, well, for any of us, but especially with students, because the act of writing processes the information at a deeper level and helps you learn the information at a deeper level. That's what note-taking is fundamentally about, right? It's not just about recording what you learned. It is the learning. And so I just want to spend a few minutes here on the podcast sharing a few strategies that you can help your students use to take notes in a way that deepens their learning, but then also has a record of the learning so that they can go back and do that test prep or quiz prep or just reinforce the learning later on, which is good practice. But ultimately, note-taking is about the actual act of learning. So here are a few strategies or tips that can help you do that. And let's start with handwritten notes. I talked about it a little bit a moment ago, but I want to say it again just so that it sticks in, because this is such an important point, especially in the digital age that we live in. Research shows that writing by hand activates the brain differently than typing. I remember when I went to college, I got my very first laptop. So this was back in 2005. I got my first laptop ever. And very rarely could you actually take it to class because I had a moped. And I couldn't fit that 900-pound laptop into my laptop very easily. But every now and then, you'd bring your laptop to class, and you just got better and better at listening to what the professor was saying, and you write as fast as you can, and you try to write it down verbatim. And because of the sweet Mavis Beacon, you got better and better at typing quickly, and you could almost type everything that they said. So you could type really fast. You actually don't have to listen to what they're actually saying. You don't have to understand it in order to type it out verbatim. But what handwriting does is it slows it down. You can't handwrite nearly as fast as you can type, right? Like that is why cursive was invented, so that you could take notes faster. But even with cursive, which is a dying art form, it's slower, which means students can't write down every word. Instead, you have to summarize. You've got to rephrase. You've got to make decisions about what matters most. And this extra processing, it strengthens a student's memory and their comprehension because they're having to do extra with it. Again, it's going from passive learning to active learning. I can't just write down everything you say. I have to think about what you're saying and figure out how can I summarize it before you move on. And so that's extra processing. Writing by hand also slows the pace just enough for the brain to consolidate new information, right? Digital tools are great, and typing can be efficient, but putting pen to paper can help make learning stick in deeper and longer lasting ways. And so maybe consider telling your students, laptops away, please. We're going to do 15 minutes where I'm going to tell you about this big idea, or I'm going to share a story with you, or I'm going to explain a subject, and you can only have your pen and paper out. And they'll get a little sweaty, and they'll be like, wait, but we have one-to-one laptops, or I've got my phone, I can just record it, or I've got a tablet, and nope. You can only have a paper and a pencil, because even though we got all these digital tools that have proliferated your life, you're going to learn more because you wrote it on sheets of paper. So that's one thing. Here's another strategy I love. It's sketch notes. Sketch notes is another name for it, is visual note taking. This is where students draw out what they're hearing instead of only writing the words. Because to sketch what you hear, it's kind of like the handwriting and comprehension that comes from it. To sketch what you hear, you have to comprehend the information first. The act of translating words into images, it encourages active listening and focus and creativity. Some students, and I love doing this as well, it's combining text with arrows and little doodles and symbols that capture my thinking. And with tablets and styluses, like some of that technology we have, they can do it digitally just as easily as on paper. I've spoken at a few different conferences in the last couple of years where they've actually had an illustrator there sketching everything I said during my keynote. I was actually in Portland, Oregon last year at a conference called A4LE talking about learning spaces, and they had a professional illustrator there paid to draw everything that I was saying, and it created this beautiful sketch note of the talk. And I have to imagine that illustrator learned something or was at least would remember my talk more, because in order to hear the information of that keynote, they had to draw it. In order to draw it, they had to hear it. They had to learn it. They had to process it. And so you can do the same thing with students. You can say, all right, I'm going to talk about what caused World War II. And you can only sketch what I'm talking about and use 1 or 2 words at a time, but you can't take full notes. You got to sketch it. And I like to remind students, this isn't about creating artwork. This isn't about creating this beautiful, neat illustration. This really isn't for other people. This is for you, because when you can illustrate an idea, that means you have to understand an idea. And so again, it's just another way to increase comprehension, understanding, and to give something for students to do other than just listen to you talk. So another strategy, and this is a tried and true old school one, but it works. It's just the double entry diary. This method, it's simple, but it's powerful. Students divide their page into 2 columns, one for quotes and one for thoughts. And in the first column, they jot down lines or ideas that stand out to them. And then in the second column, under the thoughts, they respond to those ideas, writing their reactions or questions they have or connections they've made. And so this turns note-taking into a conversation with themselves. They're not just copying, they're reflecting on what they're copying down. And if they want, they can even compare their notes with AI-generated ones afterwards to see what they caught that the machine didn't, right? What did I capture here that maybe AI or ChatGPT didn't put here? Or AI can also help fill in the gaps, right? They can see wow, I didn't capture this part, but this seems helpful, and I can add it to my notes, which is part of the review part. But again, they're engaging with the information on a deeper level. And it's this act of taking notes in the first place that builds that deeper understanding. There's also mind maps, which is just another great strategy. Students start with a main idea, and they put it in the center of a piece of paper, and they circle it. And then they branch out with other circles for supporting details and examples. And when you do this mind map, you're encouraging comprehension, because you can't map what you don't understand. You can't draw those separate details and connect things if you're not paying attention and understanding. And so it helps students see the connections between concepts instead of treating them like isolated facts. This is helping with organizational skills. It also really works well in groups. Students can build a shared mind map with each other, and they can do it on paper, on chart paper, or they can use tools like Canva, which I love, or Mural, which is another collaborative illustrating tool. So try mind maps if you haven't done it. Then there's also just the outline method, which is about organizing your thoughts. This is maybe the simplest approach I'm going to share, but it's effective. The outline method organizes information into main topics and subtopics, and then supporting details. Students create a hierarchy that mirrors the flow of ideas, which helps them see how everything fits together. It's almost like a written out mind map. So it's using text as the main vehicle for that. And this develops critical thinking, because they have to decide what's essential and what's supporting. It's not just keeping track of content, it's practicing how to organize complex information, something that they're going to use well beyond school. And then I guess I've got 2 more. One is collaborative notes. If you know me, I like to talk about collaboration a lot. We have to teach students how to work together. Well, what if we teach them how to listen together, right? You can have students build notes together in a shared space like Google Docs. And so what you do is you say, all right, find a group of 3, and you're going to create a Google Doc together and change the share settings so everybody can edit. Now, each student's going to take on a different role. One student's going to capture the main idea. Another is going to add examples. Another is going to track questions they have, whatever. So give them some different specific roles to do. And then say, all right, you're going to take notes together, performing your role while we watch this video, or while we read this article, or while I give a lecture, whatever it is. And so what this does is it lightens the load, but it shows them how professionals collaborate to make sense of information. And a simple trick is to have each student choose their own font color so you can see who contributed what. It's very easy, because then you can have them turn it in as a formative assessment to see, all right, what did they comprehend? Did they participate during this activity? And you can see, okay, Brian has a bunch of notes and he's in blue, and Kyle doesn't have a bunch of notes, and I can tell it's Kyle because he's got the red font or whatever it is. So collaborative notes, it shows students how different perspectives deepen understanding, and it produces a resource that's richer than anything that they could create on their own. And then the last strategy, it's more of just a practice to add in, is giving some reflective pauses during some type of direct instruction, whether it's reading an article or video or a lecture. It's just having students pause in the middle of what you're doing so that they can build in some time to take notes or to summarize what you're saying. So just to move from passive listening, say, all right, we're going to take a quick break. I want you to summarize what you just learned in the last 10 minutes. I want you to summarize what you learned. I want you to write down a question you have, or I want you to highlight the single most important point that I made in this time. So go ahead and do that, and then we're going to pick up where we left off. These pauses give the brain a chance to consolidate the information before you move on. Even 1 minute of doing this, another term for this is called a brain break. Even a 1 minute brain break where you move from listening to actually doing something, it helps reset their attention. It reduces overload. It keeps students actively processing the lesson instead of just scrambling and fighting to keep up. So build in reflective note-taking pauses. So let's take a step back. We live in a world where students can get instant transcripts and AI-generated summaries and more information than they'll ever need, and it's all at their fingertips, right? It's all on the screens in front of them. So it might seem like note-taking isn't necessary anymore. Do we really still need it? If I can just record what you said and transcribe it and have it do everything I want to that information, and I can have the most unbelievable study guide the world has ever seen because I have ChatGPT, why do I still need to take notes? Why is this even still worth talking about? I think the opposite is true. In the age of AI, we need critical thinking and communication and organization and adaptability more than ever. And note-taking develops all of these competencies. Students learn to decide what matters. They critically think when they look at information. They capture and organize ideas clearly and write it down. That's communication and organization. But then also, if you use these different strategies we're talking about, or you have students vary how they capture information, they're adapting, right? They're adapting to different methods depending on the context. They're seeing there's more than one way to do things, and I can figure out what works best for me. These are skills that go way beyond just learning the information you are trying to present them. But also, when they take notes as a means of more than just recording information, but actually to learn it, they're learning it more deeply. Writing is learning. Note-taking, strong note-taking is an act of learning, right? And that's why when they leave your class, they're going to take those competencies, those skills, and that deeper learning with them the rest of their lives. So that's why I think it was worth talking about note-taking today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you liked it, I would love for you to share it with another educator or anybody who you feel would like listening to it as well. I also have a whole article on this. If you'd like to read it or share that will be in the show notes or on my website at trevormuir.com/note-taking. But you can also find this and all this information and everything else I create on social media at Instagram at The Epic Classroom, or Facebook, The Epic Classroom, or just go to my website and you can find a bunch of stuff there. But anyway, so good to connect with you again. Thanks again, as always, for listening to the Epic Classroom podcast. I'll talk to you next time.